his regime. No one, I'm sure no one in this room, certainly no one in the UK and indeed around the world, wants any kind of military solution to this problem. No one actively desires that outcome. But Kim Jong-un and the world need to understand that when the 45th President of the United States contemplates a regime led by a man who not only threatens to reduce New York to ashes, but who stands on the verge of acquiring the power to make good on his threat, I'm afraid that the US President, whoever he or she might be, will have an absolute duty to prepare any option to keep safe not only the American people, but all those who have sheltered under the American nuclear umbrella. And I hope Kim will also consider this, that if his objective is to intimidate the US into wholesale withdrawal from East Asia, then it strikes me that his current course might almost be designed to produce the opposite effect. Already, President Moon of South Korea, hitherto seen as one of the political leaders most open to engagement with the North, is installing US-made THAAD missile defences. And in Japan and South Korea, it is easy to imagine the growth of domestic pressure for those governments to take further steps to protect their own populations from a nuclear North Korea. In short, Pyongyang faces the same dilemma as Tehran. By continuing to develop nuclear capabilities, Kim risks provoking a reaction in the region that is at once defensive and competitive, that reduces, not increases, his security and therefore reduces, not increases, the survival chances of their regime. And therefore, I hope that Kim will see that it is no part of Juche, his family doctrine of national self-reliance, nor is it in the interest of his national security to end up with an escalation of America's military presence in East Asia, let alone to run the risks that could imperil his regime. And until he understands that, I'm afraid we have no choice collectively but to step up the pressure on Pyongyang. And it's one of the most encouraging developments this year that the UN Security Council, with the strong support of the UK, has unanimously passed 3 resolutions to tighten the economic ligature around the regime. When I joined a debate on North Korea in the Security Council earlier this year, I was struck by the unaccustomed absence of discord. For the first time, the Chinese have agreed to impose strict limits on the export of oil to North Korea, which until now was taboo. There has been an unmistakable change in Chinese policy, and that is warmly to be welcomed. In his speech to the 19th Party Congress last week, President Xi hailed China's standing as a world power. And I would say there is no more urgent problem for China to address, nor any where Beijing has greater influence than the threat to international security represented by the behaviour of North Korea. There is also unprecedented discussion between China and the US on how to handle this crisis, a closest, by the way, that I believe bodes well for the world. And I should again pay tribute to my colleague Rex Tillerson for his efforts. Whatever we may think of the regime and its behaviour, the ruling elite in North Korea is in the end composed of human beings. We must find ways of getting through to them, and at the same time, not just toughening the sanctions regime, but enforcing those already in place. And in this respect, again, the Chinese hold the key. This is the moment for North Korea's regime to change course. And if they do, the world can show that it is once again capable of the diplomatic imagination that produced the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, arduously negotiated back then, and after 12 years of continuous effort, produced the JCPOA nuclear deal with Iran. It won't be easy, but the costs of failure could be catastrophic. We cannot disinvent nuclear weapons or wish them away. And the events in the Korean Peninsula are the clearest possible rejoinder to those, such alas as Jeremy Corbyn in at least some of his pronouncements, though I accept in these matters and so many others, he says different things at different times, to those who say we should unilaterally cast aside our nuclear weapons. To wield a nuclear deterrent, as this country does, is neither easy nor cheap. Indeed, it imposes a huge responsibility on any country. We are one of the handful specifically recognised by the NPT to possess such dreadful weapons, and we do so not just in the name of our own security but via NATO for the protection of dozens of our allies. And by holding that stockpile, a minimum stockpile I should say, which has been reduced by half since its Cold War peak, we play our part in deterring the ambitions of rogue states. It is 25 years since the end of the Cold War, and a new generation has grown up with no memory of the threat of nuclear winter and little education in the appalling logic of mutually assured destruction. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, their destruction, the full horror of what took place, is now literally fading from living memory. When people like Alan Chalfont drew up the NPT, those horrors were still fresh in the hearts of the world. We must not be so forgetful or so complacent as to require a new lesson in what these weapons can do, or the price of failing to limit their spread. The NPT is one of the great diplomatic achievements of the last century. It has stood the test of time. In its restraint and its maturity, it shows an unexpected wisdom on the part of humanity, an almost evolutionary instinct for the survival of our species. It is the job of our generation now to preserve that agreement, and British diplomacy will be at the forefront of that endeavour. Thank you all very much indeed for your attention this morning. Thank you so much.
Foreign Secretary, I know you've been kind enough to say you'll take a few questions, and there was a couple I wanted just to kick off on behalf of everyone here. You really split that talk into two pieces, the Iran piece, the North Korea piece, both examples of ways that we're having to face the challenge of sustaining the structure of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. What I would ask maybe as a first question is, given that the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that's been done with Iran, is there, I think I heard you support it quite strongly, and you noted that President Trump has not abandoned it. But is the British government then in a position to keep supporting British companies investing in Iran at a time when it looks like the United States, at least, does not believe, as you do, in the value of this agreement in the long term? Can British companies have the kind of confidence, and other companies, but from any other part of the world for that matter, that the kind of plan to help Iran take advantage of the economic opportunities of this agreement? That's only going to happen if investment comes in. So what would you say about that part of the deal?
Yeah, I think just to get back to what, thanks Robin, what I was saying in the speech, it's crucial for people to understand that the core of the deal, which was a trade-off between Iranian good behaviour on its programme for military use nuclear research and program and economic progress, and economic engagement with Iran, the core of that deal is still there, and it has not been voided by the president, and as he's not abrogated, he's not junked it, he has not torn it up, and that was very clear from his statement, and it's very clear on Capitol Hill as well. So, to the extent that Iran abides by, and the IEA is very clear that Iran is in conformity with the nuclear provisions of the deal, to the extent that we're working very hard with our allies to push back on that, and we are.
And on North Korea, one quick question on that as well. So, you said there should be creative solutions, there should be some ways forward. Would you see, over time, a JCPOA equivalent for North Korea? And if so, is this a time when the United Kingdom, France, Germany, there was an E3 that got involved on the Iranian issue when Americans were skeptical and when the situation looked like it was really stuck? Is this a moment where Britain's going to act by itself? Is it a case of creating a bit of a team like was done on the case of Iran? I mean, what can we offer?
I think the crucial thing at the moment is not to dissipate the focus of the diplomatic activity at the moment. And I tried to be clear that I think the single most productive avenue for diplomacy at present is Chinese economic pressure. And that is the thing that I think can make a difference. As everybody knows, the Chinese control 93% of North Korea's external trade. They control the oil supplies. It's they who really have the future of that economy in their hands. It's a heavy responsibility for China. No one's pretending this is easy for Beijing. But I think one of the most encouraging things we've seen in the last few months is the willingness of the Chinese leadership to adjust their policy, to take account of the real uncertainties, the risks from Pyongyang, and to take action. Now, there is more, in my view, that the Chinese can do, and we should certainly encourage them down that path.
Right. We've got a little bit of time for some questions, so I've got a few hands that I've seen go up, and so let me do a bit of a mix of speakers first. So first I'll go here. Gentleman there.
Thank you. Carl Dillon from ITV News. You won't be surprised, notwithstanding your speech, this is about Brexit. How much more money should the UK offer Europe to move on to trade talks, given that the EU is already offering to start talking about trade talks internally?
Well, thanks very much, Carl, and you're totally forgiven for raising the subject, which I think you'll notice I studiously, successfully avoided. The reality is that we think, that I certainly think, that the Prime Minister in her Florence speech gave a very fair account of how we want to proceed on citizenship, on finances, on the rights and privileges dossier. The UK has made what we think is a pretty good offer. I'm glad that at the Council in Brussels they seemed more positive, frankly, than I thought they were going to be, to judge by some of the anticipatory drum roll of that council. They've given a fair wind to the idea of themselves now discussing the new trade deal, or however they want to proceed. I suggest, humbly, to our friends and partners in Brussels, now's the time to get on with it. You know, let's not let I dare not wait upon I would, or let the native hue of resolution be sicklied o'er with a pale cast of thought, or whatever. There is a current in the affairs of men. They should grip it, get on with it, and start thinking about the future. And I'm sure that we can both think very creatively and very positively about how to come to arrangements that suit our constituents on both sides of the channel, and benefit businesses not just in this city, but in Paris and Frankfurt and across the whole of Europe.
Let me keep a little bit on the press side, John, as well, because otherwise I'll get I'll cluster a little bit. Yeah.
Foreign Secretary, it is your job to strengthen British influence. Yet in Brussels and among European leaders, the Prime Minister is seen as weak in relation to her party. You have been so outspoken about your view of Brexit that some of your colleagues have called for you to be sacked. So, on Brexit,
identify these people. I screen them, produce them, John.
You've been very outspoken about your vision of Brexit. Brexit. So have you been helping Brexit or helping to weaken Theresa May?
Well, as I said just now in my answer to Carl, we think that the offer that the Prime Minister made at Florence, and I remind you that the entire British cabinet is united around every dot, comma, syllable of the Florence speech. We think it's an excellent text, it's an excellent basis on which to proceed, and we hope our European friends and partners agree. I trust everybody has read, all you foreign policy junkies, you've all read the Florence speech, haven't you?
Not everyone here is from Europe, or Britain for that matter.
But they are nonetheless foreign policy junkies.
No, actually, I think quite a few different sectors here.
I'm so sorry.
And I'll show that by the next set of questions, actually. I'll take one of my colleagues here, because I know there's a report come out, and I know where it's going to take us, I think, so that'll be useful. I'll come round.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to say you were foreign policy junkies if you're I'm so sorry.
Boris Johnson, I manage Ukraine Forum at Chatham House, and I appreciate, Foreign Secretary, you mentioned Ukraine, but also Belarus and Kazakhstan
Yes.
here of the news. But we know what is the big elephant in the room. It's Crimea, and it's the territorial integrity that was guaranteed by Russia for the same matter in the United Kingdom, United States, France, and China were co-signatories. What is your proposition? How can we resolve Crimea to restore trust in international law?
Well,
thanks.
You're putting your finger on one of the most agonising sore points of the a diplomatic, a political failure of, and indeed an act of aggression that has so far we have found no adequate, to which we've so far found no adequate response, and we must be honest about that, because Russian behaviour in Crimea was, as I said, the first seizure of sovereign territory of another European country since 1945. And yes, it was dismaying, and it remains shocking. That's why the United Kingdom has been in the lead in insisting that we do not relinquish our pressure on Moscow. We do not relax the sanctions that Moscow has faced as a response to their behaviour. And we will continue to be in the forefront of insisting that Russia must pay a price for what it has done.
This wasn't a setup, but I did see this hand go up earlier on, Mr. Pushkov. So there's a microphone will come here, please. On this side of the room. Yeah, thank you. Got to even it out a little bit. I'll come to you, Madam, after this.
Alexei Pushkov, Upper Chamber, Russian Parliament. Mr. Johnson, you've cancelled your trip to Moscow, which was planned for April. Now it seems you decided to go there in December. What brings you to Moscow? Why now, and what do you expect from your talks with Mr. Lavrov?
Well, thank you very much, and welcome to London. I would just say this: our relations with Russia at present, in view of what happened in Crimea, in view of outstanding issues between our country, which I need not delay this audience with, which they will be familiar with the Litvinenko affair. They will be familiar with our anxieties about cyber warfare and so on. Our relations with Moscow at the moment are difficult, and we know that. You know that. We all know that, and it's a great pity, by the way, because when I was mayor of this city, and certainly 20 years ago, it seemed possible that there would be another relationship. I think we all go through this. I genuinely thought that we would be able to welcome Russia into the comity of democratic nations in the way that was envisaged by Bill Clinton and others in the 90s. It never really happened, and I think we have to do a bit of soul searching about why it didn't happen, how we lost Russia and what went wrong. I think there were faults on both sides, but we are where we are, and it's difficult. My answer to your question is I'm going to Moscow because, notwithstanding the difficulties, we have to engage. And there are things where, of course, we share priorities. There are areas that dealing with terrorism. You've got a football World Cup coming up. I think we're still in it.
Yeah.
England's still in it. England is still in it. Just clear. England is still in the World Cup. We have issues to discuss about security of managing gigantic sporting events, in which I have some experience. There are things that we want to do together with Russia. So I'm looking forward to that trip. It won't be, I've been many, many times to Moscow. Indeed, I think I have ancestors from Moscow. Before becoming Foreign Secretary, I strategically stationed my ancestors around the world, as some of you may know. So I have family from there as well, and I'm looking forward to going back to my roots once again. But you know, our policy on Russia, as you know, is engage but beware, or possibly beware but engage. It's one of the two, and that's I'm afraid what we're sticking to.
Time for a couple more questions. Madam, be waiting there, lady there, please.
Thanks very much, Foreign Minister. I'm Emma Belcher from the MacArthur Foundation. I have a question specifically on nuclear weapons, and that is, I'm wondering if you would be able to comment on the impact of the ban movement. So the movement that started off as humanitarian consequences of nuclear war, that led to the ban treaty that was recently negotiated with the United Nations. So there are proponents and opponents. Proponents saying it further legitimises nuclear weapons, and opponents say it will undermine the NPT. Given where we are today, that there is a ban treaty in effect, and given the sort of damaging impact, I would say, it probably has had on disarmament diplomacy, what prospects do you see for future cooperation between the nuclear weapon states that did not support the treaty and the other countries that did?
Well, the ban treaty in the end, I think I understand the sentiments behind it, and I hope that those came through loud and clear from what I said earlier on in my speech about the horror of nuclear weapons. And so I completely understand the emotional drive. And of course that has to be right. On the other hand, my speech was also an argument for the NPT. And within the NPT it is clearly envisaged that as long as you have states, rogue states, with the potential to launch ICBMs at the continental United States, and indeed at this continent, at us here in Europe, then it is sensible for us, the P5, to maintain their nuclear deterrence. And I'm afraid that's the heart of what I was trying to say. I mean, I think the NPT, as framed, has stood the test of time, and we should stick with it. And yes, I'm afraid that the ban treaty did, in my view, undermine, or tend to undermine, the logic of the NPT.
Okay, White, yeah, paper up there, yeah.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary Alistair Bunn from Sky News. Policy towards North Korea has been all about preventing North Korea from obtaining a nuclear weapon. You could argue that has failed. Is it time now for the world to accept that North Korea is a nuclear state and adjust its policy accordingly in a way it did with Russia many decades ago? And if not, can you foresee any circumstances where you'd support a preemptive strike by America?
I just go back to what I said earlier on. I don't think anybody can conceivably want a military solution to this problem. And indeed, I know many who have studied the matter find it very hard to see how the nuclear solution, how a military solution might play out. I mean, and yet, clearly, it must remain on the table. There must be the possibility of some kind of military option. There is a spectrum of things that could be done. That possibility must, at least theoretically, be maintained on the table, which is why I said it was the duty of any president of the United States, given the threat that his or her country could face from a nuclear-armed North Korea. It is the duty of the president at least to explore those military options and to keep them on the table. But at the same time, I believe the really productive avenue of discussion is the one with the Chinese, is trying to get Pyongyang to the table, to try to get a halt in the program for Kim Jong-un to take a different course that would be to the benefit of his regime and indeed of his people. And that's what we're working for.
I think we've headed over time, sir, so I should let you, I've got a lot of hands up, but I'm not going to be able to give more time to do it. We're already a little over time, 20 past. So I have to say sorry to all of you who've been standing there with your hands up waiting to ask questions. The Foreign Secretary has to...
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we now have time for a coffee break, I believe, which is taking place in that area, over there.
kind of wanted to be like the light when his eyes were like this, like just sad.
Thank you.